Most of us start out with crypto this way. We try to find out what's the perfect altcoin. We do our fundamental research, we maybe follow a recommendation we have seen somewhere, and then we are buying and hoping for the best. But in the end, the most important thing is not what specific altcoin has been bought. What's more important is where is the general macro environment headed? Is the capital currently flowing into Bitcoin? Is it flowing into Ethereum, Solana, or rather the smaller altcoins? Those capital shifts matter much more, and that's what we're going to look at in this video. And of course, we start out with the mother of all capital shift indicators, and that's the Bitcoin dominance. So you look at the entire cryptocurrency market cap, and we see what is currently Bitcoin's market cap in relation to all of the rest of crypto. This is a long-term chart. It starts in 2016. In the early days, there was only Bitcoin and a few other smaller tokens. Then came the launch of Ethereum, which shook up the industry with a subsequent boom of ICOs, initial coin offerings. People speculated until the Bitcoin dominance hit 38%. So the majority of crypto was not Bitcoin, it was the smaller altcoins. The market crashed and people went back into Bitcoin, and then we had another altcoin season. So it seems like there is somewhat of a top at around 73% Bitcoin dominance. The question is, are we going to see another altcoin season once we hit the 73% again? And at the same time, is it safe to assume that Bitcoin will continue outperform the smaller altcoins for a while now, maybe until end of the year, if the current rate of increase of that metric is any reliable indication? Now let's first continue with the Ethereum dominance. Ethereum tended to trend upwards up until a point when it changed from proof of work to proof of stake. Then it became less relevant within crypto. So the dominance moved from 21% all the way down to 7%. And we actually anticipated this bounce here because in September of 2019, we also turned around at that level. And again, this chart would imply that maybe Ethereum has some more room to grow. It could outperform the rest of crypto by around 50%, maybe potentially even 120%. But is a rally like this justified? In the end, those capital flows have to align at least to a degree with the fundamentals as well. Let's have a look at two more metrics before we dive into the details. This is Solana dominance. So this is now a quite strong, stable third contender within crypto. And initially, we had a nice adoption curve, then a massive crash with the bear market and the subsequent FTX collapse. And in the last 1.5 years, roughly, we are trading in somewhat of a tight range, and we are at the lower end of that range. So Solana might outperform as well. Now this looks all pretty weird, right? Bitcoin dominance should go up, Ethereum dominance should go up, Solana dominance should go up. So what in the end goes down? I think this is the answer: the smaller altcoins. So this is now the fourth and last metric that we're looking at before we get into the details. This is now the market cap of the smaller altcoins, so the ones that are not in the top 10 relative to everything else. And initially, we had a lot of excitement around the altcoins, but since the beginning of 2022, we see the altcoins, the smaller altcoins, underperform the rest of crypto by 63%. And I believe that's very likely going to continue. And here is why. Let's dive into some fundamentals. First of all, we've got this here. What we're looking at is the monthly unlocks in the altcoin market. So when a project launches, it tends to not launch with the entire supply at the beginning. It tends to increase the supply over time because maybe the team shouldn't sell directly, right? They first have to build the project. The early investors, they also shouldn't just pump and dump. So they also get some unlocks. So over time, we've got these vesting unlocks. We've got the linear unlocks as well, maybe for the usage of the platform. So money has to flow into the altcoin market in order to keep the price stable, because the supply is growing with all of those unlocks. And if the demand doesn't grow at the same rate, then the price has to logically come down. And so this is just the linear unlocks. Per month, we've got roughly $1.4 billion that get issued in the altcoin market. If there is less than $1.5 billion getting into the market, then the average price in the altcoins will go down. But we don't just have the linear unlocks, right? We've also got the vesting unlocks, and that's this chart over here. If we now combine both, we get this. It's around 3 to 2.5 billion worth of unlocks every single month. Now, is this a lot? Is this a little? It's always hard to deal with those large numbers. The best is probably to just compare it, right? Let's say we go with the leader in crypto, Bitcoin. There is Bitcoin mining, right? So the mining companies do get new Bitcoin assigned to them regularly. How much do they potentially sell? Let's say the miners were to sell every single Bitcoin over time. What kind of selling pressure would that induce on the market? Let's run the numbers. So we're currently at 0.84% annual inflation for Bitcoin. So this is what the miners are getting. This, by the way, will go down over time, right? Every 4 years there's a halving. The next halving will be in 2028. But let's work with the 0.84%. The market cap of Bitcoin is 2.16 trillion. So when we then run the numbers, we get this here. 0.8% times 2.16 trillion, that's 18 billion per year, divided by 12 is 1.5 billion per month. So 1.5 billion of potential selling pressure for Bitcoin versus 2.5, potentially more than that, for the altcoin market. Now that doesn't look too bad, right? Yes, there is more selling pressure for the altcoins, but let's say retail suddenly gets super excited about crypto again because say Bitcoin hits 200K very quickly, the price rises, all media talks about the altcoins again. A lot of new investors enter. Couldn't that selling pressure be compensated by all of those new entrants? Maybe temporarily. But here's why I say temporarily only. Because the market cap of Bitcoin is 9 times larger than the market cap of others, so of the altcoins. So when the selling pressure of the altcoin market is roughly double of what we have in Bitcoin, and Bitcoin at the same time is 9 times larger, that means relatively speaking, the selling pressure is 18 times larger for the altcoins. The altcoins have massive constant selling pressure. And that's the reason why I believe Bitcoin will continue to outperform the altcoins. But we didn't just talk about Bitcoin and we didn't just talk about the altcoins. We also had a mention of Ethereum. And again, the idea that we want to explore is where is currently the capital headed? For Bitcoin, we've got the growing dominance over the next months, and we all know why that is. It's because of the purchases through the micro strategies and the meta planets of this world. Plus, of course, also the purchases through the ETF, right? In the last 1.5 years, those entities bought up more than 5% of the supply. And it seems like this is growing quite constantly in a somewhat linear fashion. But then there's also Ethereum. And Ethereum's tokenomics actually look better than Bitcoin's, at least for the moment. Because while Bitcoin supply expansion is 0.84, 0.83% per year, Ethereum supply expansion is only 0.74% per year. Now this does fluctuate based on the usage of Ethereum, but at the current usage for the last 30 days, that's what we are getting. And Ethereum, similar to Bitcoin, has the big advantage of being the first mover in a market. Bitcoin was the first mover in crypto as a whole. It became the store of value. Ethereum is the first mover in decentralized finance. Thus, a lot of onboarding and offboarding of stable coins, for example, happen on Ethereum because it's seen as the safest of all of the blockchains. The total value locked of all of decentralized finance goes mainly to Ethereum. It's got a market share of 56%. So Ethereum isn't going anywhere, it will stay around. And so historically, the Ethereum dominance is still rather low. There is more upside. We've already established how Bitcoin is likely going to outperform the altcoins, again, because of tokenomics. Now Ethereum has even better tokenomics. And so Ethereum, relative to the altcoins, is very likely going to make a similar move. It will at least appreciate, that's at least where I put my money, by another 60%. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if this long-term sideways trend will break and it will outperform even more and go to those very impressive heights of the early days. Now, I've got the impression that those kind of viewpoints are somewhat controversial. Not a lot of people think that this will happen, but this is actually a very natural process in any market, not just in crypto. As a market matures, it tends to concentrate towards a few winners. In the early days, there were hundreds of railway companies, also hundreds of automobile companies. In the end, this all consolidates towards a few winners. A single company might own a lot of brands or just combine the brands into one. For example, this year, the logo of Audi, the 4 rings. The 4 rings just represent 4 different companies that merged together into one major company. And nowadays, even Audi isn't independent anymore, right? It's owned now by Volkswagen. So it shouldn't surprise us that Bitcoin gains more dominance. It also shouldn't surprise us that Ethereum takes over more market share and will in the end outperform the vast majority of most altcoins. I do not think at all that this is a controversial take. Ethereum is already dominating and is likely going to continue to do so. Now, there is one contender that might have a chance to continue thriving, and that is Solana. Because Solana has a lot of adoption, it also has very cheap trading fees, and it does fill a niche for retail investors. At the same time, we might also get Wall Street inflows at some point. Once BlackRock gets a Solana ETF approved, we're likely going to see acquisition very similar to what we now have with Bitcoin and Ethereum. The Bitcoin and ETH ETF get purchased at roughly the same rate relative to market cap. Don't just take my word. So over here are the numbers for the Bitcoin ETF. That's 3.6% of annual supply absorption. And for the Ethereum ETF, it's 3.4%. And so Solana seems to be stabilizing at a high level relative to the altcoins. And it does have a chance to hit new all-time highs over time. But it is more risky, it is more volatile compared to Bitcoin and Ethereum, and it gets fueled usually by retail adoption. So we might actually see a four-step process this time. First, we see Bitcoin appreciating, then people rolling over their profit into Ethereum, then Ethereum is going up. Once that has appreciated enough, then Solana might go up, because then all the retail investors come back and potentially push up Solana as well, which then also gets supported, of course, by Wall Street when we get the ETF approval. So that's the game plan for Solana. But really, the major message of this video is that it's not anymore the time to try to find the next 100x altcoin, because most altcoins underperform the major assets most of the time. And there's a fundamental reason for this, right? Relative to market cap, the altcoins have 18 times more token inflation compared to Bitcoin. The Bitcoin long-term selling pressure is much, much lower compared to the altcoins. The altcoins need 18 times more demand, or rather say 19 times more demand, in order to outperform Bitcoin over the months. And will that really happen? Will the altcoins get 19 times more marginal demand, given that there's all those Bitcoin treasury companies and the ETF that's already happily buying? I don't think so, right? I think the altcoins in aggregate are screwed. There might be an outlier here and there, but in general, right, when we just want to have the odds in our favor, if we want to go with the trend, we rather should bet on falling altcoins. And I'm doing this already for quite a while. I used to do this with decentralized finance, with borrowing and lending platforms, but recently, in the last 2.5 months, I changed the strategy to perpetual futures. I started with 40K, and this is the development over time. We are now at 51K. And again, that's just in the span of a bit over 2 months. And so our community is doing the same. For example, here, right, a short on Moodang gave 300%. And it's always about being in general right. Have a look at this. This is a post by a member. All positions are green. And I doubt that your portfolio looks like this. Again, because the majority of altcoins go down. But when we are flipping the script and we actually make money when all of those insiders cash out, when we actually make money when the early investors sell, when we make money when all of that supply is growing over time that aggressively, then we can finally beat the market. Now, it is good to have some healthy skepticism, right? Just because I make money doesn't mean that everybody that follows makes money as well. So I was thinking about this. Is there maybe a way how I can very quickly turn a losing player into a winning player with that strategy? And is there maybe a way how I can reduce the risk as much as possible to make this basically risk-free? Now, here is what I came up with. When you join Premium, the link is down below, thebitcoinstrader.com, you're just watching those 2 videos. You don't have to watch all of those videos. You're just watching the first 2. How to use perpetual futures to bet on relative valuations. So we're betting on falling altcoins relative to Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana. And then how do we do the risk management part as well? This is very, very important. Once you've watched those 2 videos, right, it's just 1 hour of content in total. Then I will send you the information how to set up this trade over here. It's a relative valuation bet, and in the last month, it went up by 43%. This is my favorite position. It's also my largest altcoin position. And there's 2 reasons why I like this trade. First of all, the performance is nice, but also the volatility is very, very low. The likelihood that you don't make money in the first week after entering this trade is extremely low. Yes, there are some periods where you might not be up if you're buying at the tippy top and then you've got bad luck. But in general, the probability of making money with this is extremely high. And the reason is, of course, again, token inflation. And so here's the idea how to turn you into a winner very quickly. You just watch those 2 videos, you enter this trade. And so here's how to make this pretty much risk-free. If after 1 week you are not up on the position, so the position is in the red, then I will give you all your money back for premium, so the 125 US per month. And I will also give you the remainder of the 1 month for free as free access, so you can watch through all of the tutorials if you want to. So really, I couldn't think of any other setup that wouldn't make this easier. Now, I tried to run this crypto channel very different to the rest. In most other crypto channels, you just see people promoting the altcoins, right? They say, buy this 10x altcoin, buy this 100x altcoin, and then in the end, all the people dump on you, you're losing money. The early investors cash out, those influencers might have gotten an allocation as well, they cash out as well, and you end up in the end with losing. But we are doing the exact opposite, right? We are betting on falling prices of altcoins relative to the major altcoins that tend to outperform. I want this community to help each other and to skill up over time and to cross the hurdle from loser to winner very quickly. That's why I introduced this very first trade when you join. So a link to premium should pop up over here. Just click on that. It will lead you directly to the sign up page. If it's the very first time here, feel free to subscribe. I publish this regularly. A like would be very much appreciated as well. It helps the channel grow. See you next time on YouTube or see you in premium. Cheers.